Summer air settles over Geneva in 1955, clear and temperate, while motorcades circle the lake and hotel clerks check lists twice. The city's reputation for neutrality turns into a working instrument with flags balanced across entrances and seating plans tuned to the inch. Couriers move in steady lines, carrying folders that never leave their hands. The four powers arrive with public manners and guarded aims, careful to keep pace with expectations that feel both hopeful and fragile. It is the first major face-to-face encounter of rivals since the war, shaped by a desire to ease pressure without losing leverage. The atmosphere suggests a narrow path, where words must open space, yet confirm nothing. This program presents a speculative dramatization grounded in public records, archival summaries, press communiques, and contemporary reporting. It draws from credible materials and period context, yet it does not claim definitive access to private intent or closed sessions. Names, places, and events reflect documented history. Motives and emphasis are inferred with restraint and framed as possibilities. The tone remains calm, the pacing measured, and the details practical. We remain inside the era and its constraints, following the sequence of meetings, statements, and pauses. In Geneva, gestures matter and silence has weight. Here, the image of a thaw appears, thin but visible, and the test is whether such a surface can hold. The scene opens with officials stepping into halls where every greeting feels calibrated to the minute. The day begins with the lake almost still, a narrow ripple tracing the wake of a patrol boat as it crosses toward the far bank. Streets near the venue are open to regular traffic, though lanes are watched and timings are staggered, keeping crowds from forming knots. Inside, the reception room holds a practical order, chairs aligned, water glasses refreshed, nameplates angled for easy reading. Each delegation arrives with a disciplined cadence, neither early nor late, preserving a sense of parity that the host city values. The Swiss staff moves with unbroken focus, keeping conversation low and transitions smooth. Aides confirm the sequence for greetings, then mark small corrections in pencil. Over the entrance, a clock reminds everyone that pauses are brief and delays carry meaning. Observers note the controlled public framing, photographs by the water, short walks along a trimmed path, and measured smiles that do not linger. The mood seems warmer than previous years, yet no one mistakes courtesy for concession. Inside private rooms, doors close with a soft catch rather than a firm click, an intentional sound that suggests welcome without surrender. The first exchanges are modest and designed to test temperature. Senior figures remark on the setting, the view, and travel days that felt long but manageable. Remarks about recovery in Europe and the need for predictability follow, precise enough to signal purpose, yet broad enough to avoid commitment. Most talk stays within agreed contours. If a point approaches a sensitive edge, it is eased back by a reference to future sessions. The operative rhythm is incremental. Small statements, careful pauses, brief check-ins with aides. A press communique template sits ready, adaptable to almost any outcome, and bearing only the date and city until language is confirmed. The host reminds everyone that breaks will be short and direct, so sessions can advance on schedule. Meetings proceed with attention to form, since form keeps tensions contained and channels set. The agenda, printed in discrete type, lists security, European questions, and contacts, leaving ample room for interpretation. The hall's acoustics are kind, but still magnify a cough, a chair scrape, and the quick whisper of paper. Each delegation tries to keep those sounds rare. First discussions hold to introductory statements that define interests without drawing lines. The value here appears to lie in tone, which reads serious but not severe. When an aide slides a note to a principal, eyes do not follow the paper. They stay on the speaker, giving a sense of steady respect. At intervals, the host offers a brief summary that repeats nothing new, yet confirms movement from greeting to substance. A handful of reporters wait by the lake path, watching for signals as small as an unplanned stop or an unguarded glance. None appear. Stillness seems to be the signal. In rooms just off the main floor, translators compare draft phrases, aligning tense and aspect to keep the meaning neutral. They cross-reference common terms so no word gains unintended force. Archival meeting agendas from the morning indicate a clear timetable and a sequence designed to keep disagreements from clustering in a single block. A preliminary press note prepared in advance will later echo this pacing with simple words about cordial atmosphere and frank views. The setting continues to do quiet work, narrowing the field to talk that can be managed and recorded. When the bell signals a short recess, footsteps are even, and conversations pause exactly at the door, giving the impression of control. The next hour will move from introductions to the first heavy subject, and the hall will receive that weight without changing its modest tone. As the chair calls the session back to order for Germany's place on the table, the room fills again with the same even footfall, coats left on the back rail, glasses refreshed, and papers shuffled to new stacks marked for the afternoon block. Seats face inward at a measured distance that preserves equality, a detail fixed days earlier to avoid last-minute friction. The chair invites opening views on the German question, and the effect is immediate. Posture tightens, not hostile, but fixed. Statements begin with recognition of Europe's strain, then move to principles that each side repeats with slight variation. The Western position emphasizes unity linked to stability and a wider European framework, keeping language cautious but firm. The Soviet position addresses security and the risk of imbalance if boundaries change too fast, framing unity as a long-horizon subject to safeguards. Each line is familiar to the other side, but still carries impact. Aides track phrasing with quiet diligence, noting where tone softens or holds. The talk stays level, even as history's weight presses the table. No one seeks a theatrical turn. Instead, the exchange proceeds like a measured march, keeping pace with the chair's plan. Brief references to elections, treaty structures, and existing alliances appear, then recede before they sharpen disputes. When a word sounds too close to a demand, it is replaced by a word that suggests timing and conditions. The technique is not new, yet it serves. A single sentence may carry 4 separate hedges, preserving space and face for all listeners. A minor pause arrives when someone touches on enforcement and the chair restores flow by restating an earlier point about consultation. On the side tables, the day's draft agenda notes show small pencil marks where private counsel suggested negotiating room that likely will not be used. The value lies in keeping options visible without turning them into commitments. Aides exchange clipped summaries and whispers that avoid names and settle on verbs. The hall's air feels denser as the minutes accumulate, but attention does not fade. If disappointment grows, it stays hidden. A Western summary mentions reunification as a goal that must be pursued without destabilizing a recovering continent. An Eastern summary mentions recognition and security as the frame that makes any path workable. Each recognizes that the other speaks to domestic audiences as well as to the table. The effect is a shared awareness that public language must remain steady. An outline of verification and timing appears, then is withdrawn to avoid a deadlock over specifics. It becomes clear that consensus will live, if anywhere, in abstract terms about peace and contact. A short break is called to prevent the session from sliding into restatement. In the hallway, a few sentences about weather and travel serve as useful cover, allowing the mind to reset. Inside, the stenographers confirm notes with a colleague to avoid gaps or misread lines. Summary minutes prepared after the session will later reflect this careful pacing, shaping a record that shows respect while sidestepping claims of progress that cannot be supported. Returning to the table, the final round for the day on Germany circles back to tone. The chair proposes language that acknowledges the problem's scale and signals patience. There is no applause, only a series of small nods that register acceptance without endorsement. Aides gather papers with equal composure, neither hurried nor slow, and place them in folders marked only by color. The sense leaving the room is that stalemate has been managed rather than broken, which, in this space, may count as a result. The narrative in public will later emphasize openness and continuity, while the private read will confirm limits that no one can ignore. A bell signals the end of the sitting, and the corridor absorbs the quiet disperse of steps. Outside, the light has shifted on the lake, and the air cools with evening. Attention now turns to a different track, where discussion may feel less heavy, but still holds meaning. As the next session prepares to address arms control language in a plenary room set for shorter statements. The meeting reconvenes after a brief pause, with the chairs reset in a tighter circle and the speaking order simplified to keep momentum. The topic now is disarmament in broad outline, a subject that carries high hopes and higher risk. The chair invites concise remarks to avoid drift, and the first statements support reductions in principle while confirming national obligations and caution. Language centers on balance, verification, and the prevention of surprise, all articulated with phrases that leave space for review. The idea of mutual inspection receives careful attention, presented as a way to build confidence rather than intrude. It is introduced with respectful phrasing and a tone that avoids pressure. The concept draws interest, yet the room resists detail, since detail would trigger a cascade of conditions. The Western side underlines the value of transparency for stability and signals openness to new forms of oversight, provided that reciprocity is clear. The Soviet side highlights security concerns that follow any increase in access and requests, a framing that does not expose sensitive locations or methods. Points of contact appear but narrow. Each side knows that over-promising would risk later strain, so every sentence holds an internal break. When language approaches commitment, it is framed as a study, pilot, or exploration. This keeps the possibility alive and expectations moderated. A brief exchange on timelines notes that speed can be dangerous, but delay can be read as refusal. The chair notes the tension and calls for a return to general principles. Aides huddle near the wall to align verbs that signal goodwill without creating a legal hook. A press bulletin drafted for the evening begins to form in parallel, using phrases about constructive atmosphere and shared interest in reducing risk. During a short pause, translators confirm that terms like inspection, control, and surveillance will be rendered neutrally across languages to avoid unintended force. The session resumes with references to previous proposals and the need to catalog areas of potential overlap. Atomic questions remain in the background, present but not named, because naming them would prompt a different debate. Instead, the table holds to steps that could be imagined without large shifts: exchanges of observers, notification of exercises, and channels for rapid clarification. None are commitments. All are possibilities under study. The chair senses the attention curve and brings the discussion to an agreed formulation that can carry into the communiqué. It states that reductions are a common aim, that security is indivisible, and that future meetings may elaborate practical measures. The wording is not novel, but it is serviceable and free of traps. Notes from the plenary transcript excerpt will later show consistent tone and disciplined restraint, which is intentional and necessary. The last round invites closing signals rather than new claims. Heads incline, pens rest, and folders close in unison. The air in the hall feels lighter than during the Germany debate, yet no one mistakes that for progress. It is a different register, where ideas are parked rather than pressed. Staff collect unused talking points and secure them in envelopes for later review. The press desk requests a final check on 2 sentences that set expectations, and the chair authorizes language that is steady and brief. Outside, the light along the quay has thinned, and the city's evening pace takes over. Delegations drift toward working dinners with limited menus and firm end times. They will speak softly in side rooms, compare impressions, and adjust the morning's lines by a fraction. The pattern holds, slow but visible. The day's file now contains a record that can be read by any audience without stirring alarm. It is an outcome aligned with the setting and the aims. The door closes on the hall with a quiet latch that mirrors the morning. This segment yields a tone to carry forward, rather than a result to declare, and that tone now guides the next gathering, which will consider controlled contacts across borders in a smaller room near the press office, where cultural exchanges sit on the agenda. The smaller conference room near the press office feels practical rather than grand, with a square table, shaded lights, and a short list of items placed at each seat. The chair introduces the theme of contacts across borders, described as cultural exchanges, scientific visits, and structured opportunities for travel under supervision. The aim is modest and clear: reduce distortion and lower the temperature by allowing selected groups to see ordinary life on the other side. The proposal is framed as a pilot that can expand if it proves stable. Delegations nod without haste. This is territory that promises little risk and potentially useful returns. Each side states that visits should be reciprocal, focused, and limited in scope, so they do not drift into politics. The draft press note prepared earlier offers simple language that speaks of mutual benefit and respect for national regulations. It suggests that universities, orchestras, medical institutes, and sports associations might host visitors in a calendar that can be tracked. The document avoids words that hint at propaganda. It speaks instead of understanding and practical learning. Discussion turns to process: who issues invitations, who escorts the groups, and how schedules are set. The Western delegates favor a central office that can coordinate requests and keep records. The Soviet delegates ask for assurances that itineraries will not include sensitive locations. The chair proposes a rotating contact point in each capital, with lists exchanged in advance. This satisfies the need for order and control. Aides mark the page with a small star to show merging agreement. The conversation moves to content. Exhibitions of art and science appear easier to arrange than lectures or policy forums. Music feels safest, followed by sports meets that already have rules and time limits. Scientific visits are mentioned, but with care, since laboratories can raise other questions. Agreement seems possible on a schedule that begins with a handful of events in the next season. The number is left unsigned, but the idea gains traction. Translation teams work to standardize terms for periods of stay, host obligations, and access to public facilities. The language is kept neutral, placing emphasis on hospitality, not influence. The Western side notes that contact helps people form steady impressions that reduce fear. The Eastern side replies that fair coverage of such visits is essential. Both agree that coverage should be factual. The press note draft receives a new sentence that speaks of exchange lists to be reviewed at regular intervals. It states that each side may propose guests and that host authorities retain ordinary powers over entry. This line secures acceptance because it respects domestic law. Attention turns to youth and student travel, which could carry strong effects. The room acknowledges both appeal and risk. It is possible, the chair suggests, but only after refining rules for older groups who set the tone. That frame earns agreement, creating a ladder that moves from culture to study over time. The discussion remains calm. The clock advances in quiet steps. An aide brings in a thin folder that contains past examples of joint festivals and technical fairs that took place under strict supervision. These examples ground the talk with proof that such events can be managed. No one claims that these small bridges solve larger problems, yet they might prove helpful in steadying public mood. The chair seeks closing language. Delegations approve a sentence that calls for practical exchanges across agreed fields and for regular evaluation of experience to inform future steps. The final words are spare, but they carry weight because they give shape to movement without the burden of a treaty. The session ends with a list of pilot hosts written in clear type and a provisional calendar slot for autumn. Press officers will later use 2 paragraphs that mention culture and science and refrain from adjectives. The indicators for this segment are the draft press note and the exchange calendar outline, each logged by date and held for signature at the next staff meeting. After the session, the corridor hum picks up. Senior figures walk the short distance to a workroom where coffee is served and no one lingers long. Notes are filed. A secretary handles copies with smooth hands, then ties the folder with a cloth ribbon. The evening program now points back to the lake. A photograph will show figures in dark coats standing side by side, a short step apart with city lights behind them. The image says little on its own, but it supports the line that contact is possible. The delegation cars return to their hotels with simple dinners prearranged. Briefings are prepared for morning. The next day will return to public stagecraft and the way Geneva itself shapes the meeting. That stage now waits with flags already hung at measured intervals along the route to the main hall. The city supplies a calm surface that officials use as a tool. Streets near the hall are swept early. Posters in several languages welcome visitors without favoring any flag. Shop windows carry displays that are tasteful and restrained so that no one can read a signal that is not intended. The Swiss approach is to remove friction before it starts. Police logs of street closures show a pattern of short blocks and staggered times that keep crowds light and movement steady. Hotel booking ledgers reflect the same care, spreading delegations across properties that match rank and avoid noise. In the grand lobby of a leading hotel, chairs are spaced in pairs, each pair facing a different direction, so conversations cannot blend. A clock on the mantel keeps exact time with a soft tick that calms the room. The public stage is a sequence of small set pieces. A short lake walk at noon, a brief wave at the hall entrance, and a handshake in a well-lit corridor where no microphones intrude. The choreography is tight because tight scenes prevent misread moments. The host favors neutral decor. Green plants soften corners, water carafes sit on linen. The detail feels ordinary, but it is not casual. It signals that the focus remains on words. News photographers work in a fenced area marked by a line on the stone. They capture the same scene from slightly different angles, creating a gallery of sameness that assures audiences that nothing surprising occurred on the steps. Inside, the day's schedule slips are printed without flourish. Each slip lists time, room, topic, and contact name. No adjectives, no claims. The chair leads with a low voice that carries, asking guests to keep pathways clear and to observe the moving times printed on the slip. That keeps the pace brisk and avoids gaps where speculation can grow. Geneva's neutrality is not only a tradition, it is a working system. The city offers services that keep attention on the table rather than the street. That includes car routing, press rooms with stable lines, and a catering plan that favors simple food. No toasts at midday, no long dinners that might prompt a headline. In this setting, the act of meeting becomes the message, which suits all parties. It allows each to report home that dignity was preserved and tone was civil. The public reads calm, and calm is useful. Still, the neutral stage cannot change the load inside the sessions. It can only keep the edges smooth. That seems enough for this week. The lake's surface stays steady, and even the wind plays along, rarely rising above a breeze. The effect on the record is clear. Communiques can use words like cordial and frank without strain. They are plausible here. When a question from a reporter comes close to private ground, the press secretary refers to the schedule and the agreed themes. The line is firm but kind. No one wishes to spoil a rare sequence of days without crisis. The city's map helps as well because paths between hall, hotel, and airport run short and simple. Motorcades roll light and seldom stop. The cameras continue to favor images of leaders side by side, kept at even distance by the protocol team. The visual balance matches the careful symmetry inside the rooms. In the evenings, the water reflects street lamps, making the quay look longer than it is. Those walks remain brief. Delegations prefer rest over exposure because tomorrow's agenda is full. One staff member notes in a dated page that stage management lowered the noise floor and protected the meeting from shock. That sentence stays in the file, marked as observation rather than claim. The neutral stage holds its shape through the week. It has done what it can. Now attention turns to the final sessions and the effort to capture the tone in words that all will sign. The path leads back to the hall with the high windows, where the chair will place a final draft before the table and ask for calm assent while the clock runs toward the last hour of the summit. The final day begins with air that feels cooler, though the sky remains clear. Staff arrive early to check microphones, place sheets, and confirm the route for departures. The chair's office holds a near-complete draft of the communiqué, printed in large type so the sentences can be weighed without strain. The document avoids claim and settles on tone. It notes cordial discussions, shared aims in reducing risk, and an intention to explore measures that may widen contact. It does not promise change on the most difficult questions. The language is the result of many small edits. Verbs now lean toward consider and review. Nouns stay general, like security, stability, and cooperation. Paragraph 3 records that views were exchanged on Europe and that each delegation stated its position. Paragraph 5 mentions disarmament in principle and affirms that the subject merits further study. A final line acknowledges cultural and scientific exchanges as a field for practical progress. It is measured writing. It carries the shape of the week. Delegations assemble to review the draft. The process is orderly and slow. Each line is checked first for meaning, then for balance. Translators sit close and call attention to words that carry different shades across languages. Stenographic minutes from the sessions provide support for phrasing that aligns with the record. The chair uses these minutes as an indicator that the summary is fair. Where a verb seems too firm, it is softened. Where a noun feels vague, a short modifier is added to keep the sense stable. The result reads even and safe. There is no space for surprise. The signature block is left open until the final meeting concludes, then filled with date and place. The room remains quiet. No one wants to celebrate. The sense in the air is that a window has opened, narrow and temporary, and should be closed with care to keep it intact. The chair invites closing statements that can be repeated in public without change. Each delegation keeps within expected lines. Confidence is presented as steady. Respect is affirmed. Hope is mentioned, but as a product of contact rather than the forecast of an outcome. The press office prepares a short timetable for release. It lists the hour when the text will be issued and the location of a brief appearance by principals for still photographs. The threshold between private and public is crossed with a single step into the brighter corridor. The flashbulbs pop in a controlled volley, then silence returns. Reporters receive the document and scan for anything beyond tone. They do not find it. The story is the setting, the meeting, and the promise to keep talking. That story travels across news wires before evening. In the files, the two indicators that frame this moment are the final communiqué draft and the stenographic minutes that underpin it, each stamped by the Secretariat and placed in a box labeled by city and year. Cars idle outside with trunks arranged for quick departure. Bags are light because weeks like this produce paper more than objects. Handshakes at the exit last the right length. Eyes hold steady. The lake shows a line of light that tracks the late sun. Within an hour, the halls are quiet. Staff stack chairs and fold cloths. The last folder is sealed with twine. The impression that remains is not of decision, but of restraint. A pause has been shaped to survive the pressure of headlines and the pull of old arguments. It will hold or it will thin in the months ahead, but for now it sits intact on the page. That page rides with the delegations to their capitals, where it will be read, quoted, and filed. The doors close for the final time, and attention moves to travel schedules and next steps as the week's careful rhythm yields to the onward noise of trains and planes. While planning begins for follow-up contacts in the same quiet style that carried the room through its difficult hours. The departure sequence runs with the same restraint that shaped each session. Cars collect at the curb in an even line. Suitcases are lifted and doors close without hurry. The communiqué rests on desks across the city and begins its passage through print rooms and radio studios. It speaks of cordial exchanges and future work. It avoids the language of victory or defeat. Geneva's neutral setting did what it could. It held space for rivals to speak, then step away without new scars. The atmosphere feels like a winter sky that clears enough to see distance, yet still holds cold. Archives will keep minutes and schedules that show where the load rested. Press communiques will carry phrases that repeat in later years because tone survives longer than claims. What happened here may guide a next meeting. It might also remain a careful parenthesis around a long argument. Those paths sit side by side. As trains pull out and planes rise, the city returns to quiet order. Flags come down. Posters are stacked. Aides sleep with lights off for the first time in days. The question that remains belongs to time and intention. Will selective contact build enough trust to allow a harder subject to move? Will a steady record of meetings reduce the need for quick decisions made under pressure? Could the words used here be repeated with more weight elsewhere, or will they stay as a single week's vocabulary? The file is closed with a simple stamp, and the year continues in measured steps that no one can rush. Geneva holds its calm, and the corridors settle. The next scene belongs to those who read the file and decide whether a narrow path can widen without breaking its edges or losing the balance that kept these days in one piece.